everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Viking Chats podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Ed Mead. Ed, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Kristjan. Nice to be here, even though I'm in Shoreditch and I've come all the way from Dorset on a motorbike, which explains why I'm looking perhaps a little bit hot.
A little bit toasty. Now, for those who maybe haven't been in the industry that much or necessarily weren't involved, particularly in the London market, can you give us a little bit, who is Ed Mead? That's a little bit of the background.
Well, I said I've just come from Dorset. Funnily enough, I've moved back down to live in Dorset. I was born in Dorset, but I left to come to London when I was about 19. And I was an estate agent in London in the 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, 10s, pretty much up to the end of the 10s, really. And at the end of that process, funny enough, we were talking just before this, and I was very, very lucky in the late 70s and early 80s to have a couple of the best bosses in the industry, Andrew Langton from Aylesford and a lady called Rebecca Reed, who sadly is no longer with us, who ran a company called Reed Cunningham. But they were both fabulous at teaching you not the old-fashioned boring techniques of agency, but well, they did insofar as they taught you the ethics and who you're acting for, but they were very good at giving you keeping you on a long leash so you could get out there and really do stuff. So I was very, very lucky I had them, but I ended up as one of the team running Douglas and Gordon from the late 90s into the early 10s, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, absolutely loved it. But as time...
I mean, the last couple of years after the global financial crisis must have been interesting, but I imagine before that, I mean, it was a business that we really admired. I always, had one eye on you guys.
Well, the managing director, Ivor Dickinson, was absolutely fantastic. Again, sadly, he's no longer with us. He had a real eye for marketing. So people always remembered some of the extraordinary advertising we used to do, which was great.
He did do some brilliant stuff.
And the other thing was that Douglas and Gordon was not a business that was run for major profit. It wasn't a Foxtons. We made money, but not in the way that Foxtons did. So,
and it's funny you mentioned Foxtons, because I always kind of viewed you as maybe ethical isn't the right word, but at the time I always viewed you as a slightly more ethical or less cutthroat version of Foxtons, a little bit more fun.
Well, interestingly, when I was running the Chelsea office, which was the best period of my life from 1996 through to, crikey, the late 2000s, my biggest competitor was Pete Rollings, who was running the South Kent office.
Yeah. Who's he?
And Pete and I he used to get up at 5 o'clock, drive to London in his Range Rover, be working till 9, drive home. He'd do that 6 days a week. He was amazing, and he deserves all the success he's had. But I used to have lunch with him once a month, and he used to say, "Where have you been on holiday?" And I'd been off doing that. I had what I think I would describe as a balance, and I do think that's something that a lot of people miss these days. A balance between work and play, and I was always very good at that. I'm sure some of my old compadres from D&G would say that I had that too much on the balance of the holiday side. But so I was very lucky. So I went through that whole process, and then, as you say, post the financial crisis, central London, which I'd always worked in, so I'd always been in Chelsea, really, it started to lose its shine a bit. And if you go through Chelsea these days, no one really lives in Chelsea anymore. The King's Road's busy on a daily basis, but the rest of it's pretty dead.
Yeah,
I think that's about to change, by the way. We can talk about that, but anyway, it's another thing entirely, because we all know that central London prices are going through the floor at the moment. But the shareholders of Douglas and Gordon decided it was time to sell the business, and D&G was started as a rental business in 1958, so it had a massive rental.
That I did not know.
Yeah, it started as a rental business.
That's pretty unusual.
Yeah,
right?
And it
particularly
had
for that.
Absolutely, well, it was at the time. It was unheard of. The idea of having a rental agency just didn't happen. So when Douglas Gordon Pirrie, the guy that founded it, started it, he was an ex-diplomat, and he well connected, so he was putting people into residences in central London. So when I joined, we built the business into a 20 office operation, and we ended up selling it to Foxtons. All that's public knowledge. So I'd actually left a couple of years before that, because the business was just changing and I wasn't enjoying it, but also because mainly my wife, I have to say, Jamie, had come up with an idea for one of the things we discovered was a problem at D&G, which was that we had so many people who wanted to see properties at weekends and in the evenings, and we could just never accommodate them.
Yeah.
Each office had one member of staff who was tasked to do weekend viewings, but they would only work Saturdays. Their diary was full by Monday. They couldn't do it. So we had the idea of coming up with some sort of a temp thing. We couldn't quite work out what it was. So we thought, right, let's go and get it started, and Jamie was still working for Savills at the time and carried on working. She was doing all their PR for them. And so I started the business in 2000 and late 2016, early 2017.
And this is Viewber.
This is Viewber, yeah. And actually, almost extraordinarily, it started to sort of work quite quickly, not in the way we thought, which I'll talk about in a minute. But what it did do was give me an extraordinary insight into both sides at the time. I mean, you were one of the very early people, again, into sort of prop tech in inverted commas. But there were a lot of others, you know, there was Good Lord and Keynest and all these businesses that were starting up at the time. Most of them, the ones I've just mentioned, are still here, but a lot of them aren't here anymore.
Yeah.
So I had this extraordinary journey where I started to see all of what was going on in PropTech, and I knew what was going on the agency side. And an awful lot of people who got into PropTech didn't really know about the property side. They were coming out with these great ideas, but what they'd never done was check that they actually were needed in the industry.
Well, a lot of it was from a consumer experience, right? And
Yeah.
they would
Which
have
is fair enough.
they would have a crappy experience.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. But I think there wasn't that step of, okay, well, I've never worked in an agency, so maybe there's a reason it's a bit crap, or maybe there's, you know,
Yeah.
and I think that's very true, and I think it's still true to this day. And I think with the prevalence of AI now and how easy it is to code stuff, I mean, my God, I mean, I probably get offered an AI chatbot every other day from some other seller.
Well, it's definitely changed. It's changed. I'll talk about Viewber a little bit later, but because it's changed the way we do things or can do things. But so it was a fascinating journey. So the business started to take off. I got a great business partner, a guy called Marcus, who was very good at the sort of tech and corporate sort of side of things. Didn't know the industry, but that was my bent.
Yeah.
So grew the business, a lot of hard work. I mean, a lot of people said to me, "What are you doing?" I was in my mid-50s thinking,
why am I starting
a business again? And I actually thought it would be a little bit of a sort of hobby business, is a terrible expression, but nevertheless, I thought it would be something that would sort of keep me interested. But it took off, not quite like a rocket, but it moved into verticals.
Kept you busy.
Yeah, it definitely kept me busy. And I would say I was very lucky in some ways in that a lot of people, particularly my chairman, Richard Cunningham, who's a fantastic guy, he used to get really annoyed because what I tended to do was to work very, very hard 50% of the time and F about the other 50% of the time. So fishing, biking, it was always really important to me to have downtime. Yeah. And because I was a bit older, I needed to do that. So he was furious that I was building up a business and having some fun whilst doing it at the same time, which was great. And again, I'll come on to why that's sort of changing now. I mean, you know, Viewber has leached into areas we didn't think it would do. The agency world, as you've discovered, I'm sure know, tends to be run by lots and lots of middle-aged men like me who have 1 to 2 offices, and they're very difficult to aggregate. They all want to do their own thing. They've done their own thing for years. The difference now is that there are more younger people like you coming through who are much more tech savvy. Yeah. The Amazon generation, if I can put it like that. They understand that tech can help, whereas the older generation like me thought, no, thanks very much. That's a lovely idea, but we're okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So whereas we thought the agency world would go, this is great. It's like having that Savills, Stratton Parker, Knight Frank weekend staff, but on demand.
Yeah.
They didn't really think that. Several did, but not a lot.
Yeah.
What really took off was the auction business.
Yeah.
So auctions up until then, you know, if you had if you were a business like Savills and you had
because obviously that marketplace as well has boomed in that.
Well, it has
boomed,
but I would venture to suggest in a very modest way that it's boomed quite a lot because of what we do. Because up until then, if you were an auction house based in London, say, or even a fast buy and sell operation based in London, which a lot of
how the hell do you do an open house for a vacant house in Norfolk?
It used to take a lot of organisation, and you had to arrange someone to go and do the pictures, show it, do key handovers, where the key is going to be held, probably employ a local agent, give them half the fee. Now, Viewber does everything. We're in every postcode in the UK, 7,000 people all over the UK able to do, doesn't matter whether it's a photograph of a property, a marketing pack. So the auctioneers they found straight away, several of them went, no, we're fine. And then they tried us and they went, oh my God, this is revolutionary.
Yeah.
And some businesses some of the big businesses have trebled their output.
Well, the fees they make compared to agency fees.
Well, they haven't got to give half the fees away. You know, for 250 quid, they can get a preview if necessary. So they can get someone to go along and walk around and say, yeah, we'll take that on. We can do the marketing packs. We can do all the viewings. We can do any inspections, handle the keys and do the key handovers. They don't even have to turn up.
All for an allotted
sort of 250 price. They don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
So the ability so auctioneers was a very, very quick win for us. And we now do it for all the top auctioneers in the UK. Fast buy and sell is a very small part of the market, but again, a lot of people these days, if you want to sell a house, the first thing you get is all those ads at the top from
Yeah.
people offering you 75% of value. But again, that's something that we could help with very much. But we've taken a lot longer to get into the agency world, but also social housing.
Yeah.
Compliance, as you know, is right on us.
Mhm.
You've got Grenfell, all those things coming on, AWAB's law next year, all the stuff that needs an audit trail of inspection.
Yeah.
And most people just don't have them. And the only competition that Viewber has for this sort of stuff really is in-house resource. And
Yeah.
most of the people who handle this sort of stuff don't have that resource. So it was a very long journey discovering. It wasn't terribly edifying. I didn't find the journey into PropTech, learning how agents work, I didn't find it that nice, is the wrong
Interesting.
word, but
Yeah.
I found it rather, I thought, my God, is that really how it works? But that now is changing. There are a lot of young,
Yeah.
really not gung ho is the wrong word, but a lot of really savvy people now taking over or managing the agencies, and it is moving to a different sort of level. Also, at the time when I started, you had some of the big online agents, as we used to call them in those
Yeah.
days, starting up, and they obviously struggled. They created a lot of problems with people in the industry, but it was fascinating to see how that's developed and what's been going on with it. And clearly, a lot of them are still around, so it's not like they've
Much to
failed.
many people's.
Well, it is, but the thing is, there's no reason why there shouldn't be a choice for people.
Oh no, and listen, even in the early days, even when purple bricks were in their ascendancy and everyone was panicking a little bit, it was the modern version of a newspaper advert, right? It was fundamentally, no one reads Loot anymore.
Yeah.
No one goes and reads a bulletin board in their local news agent.
Yeah.
That is what fundamentally, and that's simplifying it massively, but fundamentally that's what I saw an online agent as was just the evolution of that.
Well, they struggled to do the rest of it, and what they were trying to do was replicate the ordinary agency experience on the cheap.
Well, this is it. They tried to replicate that they were the same, but for a fraction of the price,
and
rather than be like, hey, you don't have to spend that much money. You could get less for much less.
Well, I always think that there's a very strong reason. Some people require their hands held all the way through it, and some people know exactly what they're doing and only need little bits. The problem in the past is that if you wanted to get an agent on board, you paid them 2%, and you might not have needed 75% of what they gave you.
Yeah.
So the ability to pick from a menu of stuff you need. Do you need viewings? Do you need photos? Do you need the EPC? You might have all of this stuff, So I don't see any problem with having it. And actually, I mean, Purple Bricks is a much more technically able business than it was at the beginning. It'd be interesting to see what happens with it, because obviously they've got the old team back in again to.
And there was the article today saying, I mean, this will come out in a couple of weeks, but there was an article today advising that the chap from Carphone Warehouse, his name as a person of control has been removed from the company details, but his venture vehicle is there.
Yeah, Preston Ventures, yeah.
But their accounts are a month late.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think what they cannot afford to do, Purple Bricks, is squander what is a spectacularly well-known consumer brand.
Yes.
So from that perspective, they've spent the B2C money on the advertising, so people know who they are. So,
which is why they did the right decision to I think let Strike disappear as a brand that never had the market penetration.
I can't
that Purple
pretend
Bricks
to
did.
understand exactly what works and what doesn't. I have my own opinions. I've made this quite clear to the guys there, because clearly they've interacted with us a lot, because we provide a service for those people, but they, for those type of agents. So overall, the journey for me has been fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Our paths have crossed often. There are a number of us who've been going through the same sort of process over the last 10 years or so. I mean, the issue for me is that Viewber has grown from being a startup through being an SME into a successful business now. We're turning over 10 million plus. We're making
7,000 people around.
Yeah, 7,000 people around the UK.
Got to keep them busy.
Able to do jobs. I mean, again, you say keep them busy. The people we have don't really care whether they do the jobs or not. The whole point is we've tapped into this massive, it's not an underclass at all, but a massive substrata of people who had sort of been forgotten about, who can now do a bit of extra work when they feel like it.
Yeah.
And so our problem as a business is, we're profitable, very good gross margin. Most of it is recurring revenue as well, because the majority of our people have never left. We have never lost a client. We've never lost a big client, because once they start with us, they just think this is great.
Yeah, I mean,
and the only way someone leaves us is if they go bust.
Yeah.
So I mean,
and they usually get acquired by another client anyway.
Yeah,
so
precisely. So from that point of view, our issue really is that I think we've got as far as I can take the business at the moment, and we really are looking now for someone to take it to the next stage. Now, whether that's someone else investing in the business, whether it's a replacement for me, whatever it is, there's such an opportunity with Viewber. So we're investigating that at the moment to see where we go next. But it's against a backdrop. If you imagine a business like ours, you're hugely invested in compliance and all the stuff that goes with lettings. But it's a fascinating time. I mean, people will be watching this, I don't know when, but yesterday was when Burnham was sworn in as the new Prime Minister. And clearly he's got a whole new team. Well, I say a whole new team. They're the old faces, but back in having been moved around a bit.
Yeah.
We've got Angela Rayner again. So it'll be interesting to see whether this 23rd housing minister in 19 years or whatever the equation is will actually do anything different, because most people, when they come in, they think, yeah, let's go and do something fresh and groovy.
But we haven't had many come back.
No, well, we haven't had many come back, but the fact is it's a brief. I mean, it's a mildly ironic brief for Angela Rayner to have come back into, obviously, given what happened to her when she left government last time around. But nevertheless, there is so much of an opportunity. I did a bit of a rant in LinkedIn on LinkedIn yesterday about my concern about some of this new regime's statements about equalising CGT with income tax, this sort of stuff. And if every government seems to come to power saying that they want to build, and then they
don't.
They fuck it up, Yeah. They don't.
We are incredibly good at making building houses make it look insanely difficult.
Well, some of the things that Andy Burnham has suggested, like forcing public bodies to give up land, an awful lot of hospitals, if you go to a hospital, they own a lot of land, the NHS, but they'll say, no, we might build a hospital over there. So I'm not sure you can take that. But there are an awful lot of car parks, for instance, where you could build flats above the car parks.
Yeah.
Let nurses live there. There's a whole load of stuff he could do. The main problem is that even if government wants to create a whole load of housing, there's got to be private investment to back it up.
Yeah.
And not only do you have to have people investing, they've got to get a decent return. I mean, my bugbear with this is my dad built up a business in property in the 50s, 60s and 70s. And when he came to sell it in 1978, it was when the Labour Party decided that they were going to put the top rate of tax to 83%. 83%. And if your income came from what they described as unearned income from a property, there was a 15% super tax. So if my father sold his business at the time in 1978, he would have received 2 pence in the pound for his business. So he went to live in France. Can you imagine that? Imagine how mad it is to think that France has a lower tax regime than the UK did.
Yeah.
And I just have this horrible feeling that the same thing's going to happen again. And we know that Rachel Reeves has driven a load of people away with all the changes in tax she's made. And I'm not going to get into the niceties of non-doms and all that sort of stuff. But there's clearly been an exodus of the kind of people who we want to keep in this country. And it really worries me that at a time when we need to be investing, particularly in property, UK Property PLC is worth about 10% of UK PLC.
Yeah.
So it's a really big sector. And if they dissuade people from investing, which they would do, if CGT was the same as income tax, why would people bother to risk money and they're just going to get a highly paid job somewhere?
Yeah. And look, I think that I am a believer that something does need to happen with the tax landscape in terms of balancing out inequality. What that is, I'm not quite sure yet. But I think what we often find with government, as we've seen with the Renters' Rights Act, is simplistic, well-intentioned ideas that, because they are simplistic and based on good intentions and little else, often obfuscate what their objective is. As we know, the Renters' Rights Act, whilst it is going to improve elements of the industry, as we know from all the legislation that's come the last 10, 15 years, I mean, look, generally it professionalizes the market. I don't think that's anything to balk at. But you know, if you look at the Renters' Rights Act purely from a renter's perspective, it will improve some, but I would actually argue it's caused a lot more problems for tenants than it is solved.
Okay.
Well,
that's for another day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but bizarre things in there, like extending rent arrears and extending notice. Like, why would you want to make that process longer for a tenant that is already in duress? Like, you know, that to me is a mystery. You know, and the reality is, as they were warned repeatedly through the Tory campaign and then the Labour policy as well, is a lot of their well-intentioned things are going to impact the most vulnerable tenants.
Did you feel their consultancy period was right? Did you feel they did enough?
So, in the initial consultancy with the Tories, with the renters, with the rent reform bill, was it? Yeah, it was the rent reform bill they called it originally. I was actually really impressed with that, was because for the first time as a small independent agent, I saw them interacting with small independent agents, whereas historically government would typically reach out to the big boys and maybe a couple of other big independents, and they were really the lucky ones to get in a room if they did. I felt like throughout that, and to a certain extent into the Labour one, although I felt the Labour consultancies were more lip service. I felt like they were kind of sat in front of the room, but there wasn't really a discussion to be had. They decided what they were going to do.
Well, that's the reason I ask you, is because I do wonder. I mean, one of the things they could do, or Angela Rayner could do, is to turn around to people in the industry, is to get people in and sit down around a table and say, right, what do you think? You're the people that know the industry. What do you think we should do? I mean, but I just very much doubt that's going to happen.
They don't really want to hear from us, because the default position is that anything we say is negative is prefaced fundamentally on our own income and benefit.
Well, yeah,
and that was I think that was the problem I had throughout it, was that, you know, there was some very, very honest feedback from many people within our industry. I mean, we had them attend several Zoopla Lettings Advisory Board meetings, and they were at TLIC council meetings and all sorts of things, all the different letters and abbreviations you can think of. But what I found was a lot of the very legitimate, be careful if you do this, what you probably don't realize is you're going to cause this, this, and this. And often it was dismissed that, yeah, but you're saying that because that impacts your bottom line.
So you're talking about vested interests. Yeah. Do you know something? Isn't it funny? So going back to I used to, there was a stage, you won't remember this, but back in the late 1990s, I was lucky enough to write as the Sunday Times property expert every week, and I wrote as the Sunday Telegraph property expert. Well, not the Sunday, the Telegraph. I had a thing in, they used to have a magazine before the financial crisis. They had a magazine, and I was the agent provocateur. That's right. And I used to write every week. I used to write every week, 750 words in the Sunday Times and 750 words in the Telegraph, which I can do all day.
Yeah.
I'm nothing like the same as A.A. Gill was, but A.A. Gill was fantastic at knocking out 750 word pieces, and I was always able to knock those out. So I'd written for the Sunday Times and the Telegraph, and I had a voice. You know, I was able to write stuff, and the editors. Cherry was fantastic at the Telegraph, and Helen Davis at the Sunday Times was great, and they pretty much let me write what I wanted to. But I did have vested interests. So at the time I was at D&G, and I couldn't really denigrate the industry too much, or some of its practices, because they made us all look bad. And similarly, since then, I've had if I put a thing up on LinkedIn, it'll get 30, 40,000 views, and I can have plenty of oomph behind it. But what I can't do is necessarily be not rude, but completely honest about people I'd sometimes like to be completely honest about, because it might impact my bottom line, exactly as you say. And it's one of the reasons why, if I move on from Viewber and Viewber gets sold or whatever it is, I would love to be freed to sort of say,
gun out.
and I don't want to be rude about people, because of course that
but you can be brutally honest without being rude. I think you can call behaviors and attitudes out,
which actually
because fundamentally, if that is how a person, organization, entity is behaving,
Yeah, but
They might not like it.
it's annoying in some ways. I mean, I was on the board of the Property Ombudsman for years. I'm now on their industry forum, and obviously Richard Best, Lord Best, has been doing this ROPA thing for a long, long time about the registration of property agents, about getting agents to be qualified, etc., etc. And it's always slightly irritated me. I mean, when it was 15 years ago, I was all for it. I thought, yep, agents need to be qualified, and I didn't really sort of.
Yeah, I've always been on the fence.
Well, I didn't really think about it, but I just assumed because I was I was a Fricks and all that. I thought, yeah, let them eat cake. They should all go out and do the same thing. But actually, I completely flipped on that, and I do not think that agents need to be qualified. The vast majority do a fantastic job. And it's the same old story in any industry, or most industries, certainly in our industry. The majority of people are well-meaning, honest, hardworking. They do the right thing. They know who they're acting for, but you get some really rotten eggs in it that just give the whole thing a bad name.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the legislation comes from. And I didn't used to listen to people like Henry Pryor banging on, he's obviously a buying agent. So he used to bang on about how he didn't think agents needed to do any of this stuff. Because most of them were absolutely fine. I now agree with him. I do think that most people are fine, don't need that.
Yeah.
So I think I mean, if we go full circle back to the compliance thing where we started talking about Renters' Rights Act.
My concern with it as well is most of the people I know, and a lot of the people that I really respect in the industry, fell into it. They didn't go, well, because they weren't required to. But they didn't go and get a degree. They didn't go and get a certificate in professional estate agency to launch that career. And I fear for our industry. It's not an industry that many people grow up aspiring to be part of. They often stumble into it, and then, much to their surprise,
I was like that. I did a mechanical engineering degree.
And I think if we over professionalize it, what we risk is just this like pulling up the ladder.
Yeah.
People just won't, if they have to do this certification and training to find out if they like it, if they're any good, is there a business they want to work in. I think we've already got a bit of a problem with talent. But I think that would massively amplify it.
Yes.
And a lot of people that I've seen create businesses as well of varying sizes and successes, again, come from that background of stumbling into it. I mean, I've said on many podcasts, Megan 18 is the only person that I can reel off on my head, is the only person I think I've ever met who've, like, from a kid aspired to be an estate agent, because that was kind of what her mum instilled in her. And
well, if you lined up 20 18-year-olds and said, right, who wants to be an agent, you're not going to get any.
Or Jakob, who's about to start his agency in Islington. I mean, I've never seen someone do like a 7-year prelude to start their agency career, but
it's not something, as you say, people aspire to, which is a real shame, because it's a fantastic it's a fantastic job. No 2 days are the same. You can make very good money at it.
Massively misunderstood.
But it's also a question for a lot of people who are thinking about getting into agency, and they're not necessarily going to be watching this podcast, but there are so many different skill sets within the industry. We used to have a lot of people at D&G who would be in lettings, and they'd see the sales guys getting a huge check after a very, very good quarter or whatever it was, and they'd say, I want some of that. I want to go into sales. And they'd go along to the guy running the sales of that office and say, I want to move across. They say, you don't. Okay. So letting is a very different discipline. It's fine. You get your own rewards, but it's not the same. They go, no, I want to go and try it. And 6 months later, they're going, can I go back, please? Because it's a very, very different discipline. So there are so many different things you can do, whether it's in property management, whether it's in letting, sales. There are all sorts of different bits and pieces you can do. And these days, people do employ trainers, and the tech side is more important. Very interesting to see what happens with AI. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, you talked about AI. I mean, from our point of view at Viewber, it's really changed our ability to react to product introduction. In the past, if we wanted to introduce a new product and code for it and stuff, it took up quite a lot of time. Now it's bang, it's done in sort of not quite 10 minutes, but I mean, it's a much quicker exercise, which leaves you much more able to focus on the front end of stuff and what you really need to be doing, rather than how you're going to get the back end sorted out. So it's been a fascinating journey, I have to say. But I just mentioned that compliance thing. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced that one of the issues that people are going to have over the next 2 or 3 years is how you resource all of this audit trail, all of this compliance stuff. So if you're meant to be turning up, to do your fire door checks, you're meant to be turning up to do the 6 monthly checks on damp and mold. You're meant to be checking who's living in the premises. Is it the right tenant living in the premises? All this kind of stuff. It's a lot of manpower, and for us, it's been one of our major focuses over the last, because we do have that manpower to go and do it. So we've been trying to work out how to focus. We already do a lot of stuff with some of the social housing providers, but it's a very, very slow. I'm not quite sure. It's not. What's the expression when you have to go through the process of being sought out as a supplier? You have to go through
hell.
No, you know what I mean. You have to qualify as a supplier.
Yeah. No, I know. I haven't gone into the housing sector, but I know they have quite
66,
a complex
I forget these things, but
onboarding and tendering
process.
And
it's just one of those sort of things where you have to do so much, and it takes time. The wonderful thing about the social housing sector is it's much more collaborative. People do tend to sort of share when they have something that works.
You kind of get in with one,
So there is quite a lot of that. Whereas obviously on the PRS side, it's much more cutthroat, and it's much more competitive, which is fine. That's the way it works, So I mean, we have so many areas of interest. The other interesting thing that's happened to us at Viewber over the last 3 years is my chairman and I have had a number of calls from people in the States saying, can we do something with you in the States? And I'd love to go and do that, but I've just got no energy to go and do that. I mean, if you want to set up in the States, it always slightly frightens me doing business from the States, because the whole thing is so, especially with the orange man in charge. You never quite know what's going to happen.
And international things are interesting. We've actually got an agent who has been on my case for nearly a year now. He wants to go and roll out depository in South Africa. He's been an agent on ours. He's from South Africa. He's going back to South Africa. You can see a lot of alignments. But like you said, it's the international thing is
well, if you've got a man who's been trained from or a man or woman, obviously a person who's been trained over here in your business and can take it over there, then that's fine. We haven't had that luxury. I don't particularly want to send someone to America, but it's so operable over there. It really is. I mean, it makes so much sense to go and do it. So I rather wish actually I'd done all this 30 years ago, but of course the tech didn't exist. And it wasn't possible. So it's sort of quite frustrating, really. So it's been great to sit and chat. I mean, if we look at.
So you wanted to have a bit of a chat about a couple of things. We've kind of danced around one of those, which was this constant regulatory shift in lettings, and do we think that's fundamentally beneficial to all parties? I am generally of the mindset that the rental sector is better than it was 15, 20 years ago in terms of standards and quality of provision. I think as an agent in an increasingly competitive marketplace, the more technical it becomes, the more opportunity you have to convey your expertise and value. So I actually think for businesses, what I actually have found most bemusing the last few years is how many agents go out publicly on social media and rant about the legislation coming and scream about how it is the end of the PRS and it is the end of renting as we know it.
Rather than taking advantage of it and turning it into an opportunity.
Well, A, they don't take the opportunity, and B, they're then bewildered when 20% of their landlords listen to them and put their properties on the market and they go, see, told you they'd all sell up. No, they've sold up because you're the trusted voice.
Yeah.
They didn't know what the government was legislating, because most landlords don't. It trickles down and they'll learn about it.
How are you seeing the professionalisation? Because one of our biggest growth areas at Viewber is single family housing, build to rent operators who can no longer buy these big blocks of flats because they're not being built in the same number. So they're having to go into the SFH market and buy the rump end of developments, wherever they can find them, which is, I think, a great market. Of course,
we're definitely seeing a shift into bigger portfolios.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of accidental landlords leave, but a lot of that is more to do with just the time in the market, operating in London. We all know what property values have done in London pre-2015.
Yeah.
And what they haven't done really since then. So, look, most of those landlords, capital appreciation was always the big win for London.
Well, also because of all the changes, it's actually costing them money to keep them now.
Particularly if they're mortgaged.
In the past, if there was any finance on it at all, you were probably making just enough to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, I think the objective, with most of our landlords, if they had a reasonable amount of finance involved, our objective our overview of them, if they asked us to kind of audit their investment, would be, look, if it washes its back,
Yeah.
great. And if you get a little surplus, happy days, because every 8 years you're going to double the value.
But doesn't it irritate you that you've only got to mention the word landlord, especially to a politician or to someone who's not a landlord? They automatically think you're Nicholas Van Hoogstrand. They think that you're an
The
absolute
perception
shit.
of landlords is phenomenal. And do you know what? I'll give you a really interesting example of that outside of the sphere of social media and tenant rights groups and everything else. I remember a couple of years ago showing a group of young professionals, I would say mid-20s, a house we've got in Shoreditch, all being supported by mummy and daddy because the rent was punchy for their income, so they all needed guarantors. But it was, what I found really interesting was on this viewing, like they started off being super pleasant about the property, and as the viewing went on, the way they talked about landlords became more and more, let's give benefit of the doubt, disparaging. And like I said, there was very much this perception. It got to the point where I was like, sorry, what is it you think like, describe to me what you think a typical London landlord is. Oh, 20 plus properties, does nothing, makes a fortune.
Yes, I was like, fortune, but
I said, do you know how many of those I've got on our portfolio? It's like 2. Have our portfolio, and they make up roughly 10% of our portfolio.
I think people really do forget that the reason for renting out a property for the vast majority of people is because it keeps the property in good condition, the fabric in good condition.
Yeah.
And if, as you say, if it washes its face, it's good news. Some may make a small profit. It amazes me that the build to rent guys make money. I mean, it's been clearly they're aiming at the top end of the market. The really smart people who can afford the money and the extra services and all that sort of stuff. But that's still quite a small area of the market. I mean, whatever it is, only 150, 200,000 units or whatever it is that build rent.
And the pipeline keeps getting slower.
Yeah, and the pipeline keeps getting slower. But I do think the SFR stuff might change it. The single family, SFH, pardon me, the single family housing stuff might change that a bit. I think of a lot of landlords. I mean, as I said, we've found that a lot of the big players, the Allsops, these sort of people who've come to us because we can do everything for them. We can literally do everything for them.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see how the likes of Blackstone and Lloyds Living develop and integrate into the market.
Well, we're there with all of those guys, so we're really at the heart of all of that stuff. So it's a fascinating time. Listen, I mean, we could sit here talking all day. I just, you've allowed me to talk, which is great. Thank you. And I really, I've loved my time in property the whole time. I'm not saying it's come to an end, but I just think that, particularly for anyone in business, they'll know that you get to a stage where you think, yeah, the business has actually outgrown me.
Yeah.
And that's definitely where Viewber is. It's at a spectacular stage. But there's so much that worries me about the industry at the moment. Not just,
well, I think the London property market, has a lot of really big hurdles to overcome at the moment. I think, as we've touched on, capital values as an average in London have barely changed the last 10, 12 years. As you've said, the prime and super prime market is not quite free fall, but it's scary enough in areas. A lot of the investors we bought into it wasn't about the rental income, it was about the capital appreciation. If you take that out of the market,
that's a very good point.
How does that model work? And then you come into a rental market where you've got Section 24 tax, where you're being taxed on income, not profit.
And you're not getting the wear and tear allowances. You're not able to do all this sort of.
You've had legislation came in where it was more tax efficient to run a holiday let than to provide housing.
Which is why a lot of turning into holiday lets.
What government on the planet thinks the right idea for taxing property is to benefit luxury hospitality housing over citizens having a roof over their head?
It doesn't make any sense.
You touched on it earlier, the revolving door of housing ministers that we've had. I mean, Jesus Christ, we seem to be trying to challenge that record with our revolving door of prime ministers at the moment as well. But it's, I don't know. I always find with government, the one thing I find bewildering about government is you hear and see these fantastic things that governments achieve in isolated cases around the world. And I always find it bewildering and bizarre that as governments, we don't kind of go, oh, that's really fucking clever. How? Right, we don't have the same landscape as that, but that solved that problem over there. Could we do something similar?
The trouble is most people are scared to put their head above the parapet. I mean, I do think you mentioned earlier, what can you do about tax? To me, the simplest way is I can't remember which Scandi, it might be I can't remember which Scandi, I think one of the Scandi countries does a 20% flat rate tax.
I'm not sure.
And I think, if you just said everything's taxed 20%,
yeah,
everyone will just pay it. The good news is, and I don't mean
this but also in business, I think the simplification of the tax landscape.
Most of the accountants
don't give the loopholes.
Most of the solicitors would be out of business because they wouldn't have the unbelievably complicated crap you have to go through.
And you lose all of those costs within your business.
And everyone would pay it.
And you know exactly what
everyone would pay it. And I'm sure government receipts would go through the roof. I mean, Burnham says, I want to simplify things. 20% flat rate tax, mate. That's the way forward.
Yeah.
Look, I really appreciate the chance to talk. We've been talking for 45 minutes. Seems like we've been talking all day, and I could easily carry on all night. But I really appreciate the opportunity to put some of these things forward for discussion. And I know that you will present them in a way which is not sensationalist. You're someone who I listen to when you talk.
I think it's just that I think it's really healthy to discuss and debate, and some of these things are really fucking complicated. You can't just fix them with a quick fix. There isn't, I think there are certain big moves, like you've just touched on. A simplification of tax makes it, very, very simple. This bizarre imbalance, but like I said, between hospitality and housing, although that is much more aligned now. But, the bizarreness between the fact you can own a property as a limited company and pay tax on profit, but if you have it in your own name, you get tax on income. Why?
Yeah.
Why is a company benefited over a private individual?
It doesn't make any sense, and it's so complicated. The only people who benefit are tax lawyers and accountants.
And in a country where we worry about the future of pensions, particularly government pensions, why the fuck do we want to move away from something that gives a decent chunk of our population security? In later life,
it's a lot of people. It's because there's no long-termism.
Yeah.
The problem is you get a 5-year cycle, and people won't go look beyond that. So no one says this is going to take 10 years to replace, but we can't do it because in 3 years' time we're going to start canvassing for the next election. So you never get any long-termism. It's why countries like China are successful, because I say successful, they're successful in certain areas because they can just take a long-term view. They don't.
Well, and it's why
no one's going to vote them out.
Something I think is really interesting. It's not something I've seen taken off yet, but I think with this younger, as we've touched on, very tech agnostic generation, and particularly with AI and coding and everything you can do easily now, I wonder if the future is less about us waiting for government to solve these problems and more kind of community interest businesses or not for profit, or however you frame it. But you know what, we're going to build a business that solves this problem, and that's its primary objective, and hopefully it's commercially viable enough to facilitate that solution.
I hope the government allows that to happen and doesn't tax it to a standstill. So
well,
listen, thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure. Enjoy the bike ride back.
I will.
See you soon.
I have got other things to do in London, so I'd love to pretend I only came up from Dorset. But it's a good issue. Riding motorbike is like fishing, which I also love, because it's one of those things that when you're doing it, you have to do it.
Yeah.
You have to concentrate on it. If you don't, you die.
Yeah, I rode a road bike for a while and then very quickly ended. I've still got the scar for it. Yeah. So, I'm far too distracted.
I did do a piece outside, and I'll do a couple of pictures of us together, because I do wonder whether I will get any tickets. Driving across London at 20 miles an hour on a motorbike is almost impossible. How anybody who's reading this watching this lives in London and gets around on a motorbike or in a car. Yeah. How do you do it? I've got a GS 1200 BMW, and I'm literally waddling around like that.
Constantly pinging me. It's constantly pinging. I've got one of these Hyundai things with all the gadgets. And it is constantly like, you're speeding. Yeah. I'm barely moving.
You can't turn them off,
No, I know.
Anyway,
guys,
thanks very much.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for joining us, guys. And see you soon. Bye.